Welcome to the Velvet Crown Tales. Today's tale is called The Prince Rejected Me Before the Entire Kingdom. So I flew away. The kingdom of Ilaria had waited 18 years for this day. From the moment Princess Serafina and Crown Prince Lucien were born, their future had already been decided. Their parents had arranged their marriage to unite the two most powerful kingdoms on the continent. Songs had been written about them, paintings filled palace halls. The people called them the Golden Pair. Serafina had never questioned it. Why would she? Lucien had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. They studied together, played together, grew up together. And although he was never overly affectionate, she believed they cared for one another. One day they would marry. One day they would rule together. That future felt as certain as the sunrise. Until the night it all fell apart. The grand coming-out ceremony was the largest celebration Ilaria had hosted in decades. Nobles arrived from every kingdom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous ballroom. Musicians played from gilded balconies. Hundreds of guests filled the palace. And at the center of it all stood Princess Serafina. Her blush-pink gown shimmered beneath the lights. Thousands of silver diamonds glittered across the fabric like stars. Silver feather embroidery flowed down her sleeves and across her back. Around her neck rested the pendant bearing her family crest, a swan surrounded by lilies. She had never felt more beautiful. Tonight her engagement would be officially announced. Tonight she would become the future queen. At least, that was what everyone expected, including her. The king stepped forward and raised his glass. "My friends, tonight we celebrate the future of our kingdom." The ballroom erupted into applause. Serafina smiled nervously. Across the room, Lucien stood in his formal crimson uniform. Gold embroidery decorated his coat. A royal cape draped behind him. He looked every bit the future king. Then something strange happened. Lucien stepped forward. His expression was serious, far too serious. The room slowly fell silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. Serafina's smile faded. A feeling of unease settled in her stomach. "Your Highness," she whispered. Lucien didn't look at her. Instead, he faced the crowd. "I cannot do this." The words echoed through the ballroom. Silence followed. Complete silence. The king frowned. "What are you talking about?" Lucien took a deep breath, then spoke the words that shattered Serafina's world. "I cannot marry Princess Serafina." Gasps filled the room. Several nobles dropped their glasses. Others stared in disbelief. Serafina felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Surely she had misunderstood. Surely he couldn't mean. Lucien finally looked at her. And what hurt most was the sadness in his eyes. Not anger, not cruelty. Sadness. "I respect you," he said quietly. "I care about you." Every word felt like a knife. "But I do not love you." The ballroom blurred. The hundreds of guests, the chandeliers, the music, everything seemed distant. Serafina heard whispers spreading through the crowd. "You rejected her." In front of everyone. In front of the entire kingdom. Tears burned behind her eyes. She fought them desperately. A princess did not cry in public. A princess remained dignified. A princess. Pain exploded through her chest. The ballroom suddenly filled with silver light. People screamed. The floor trembled. Magic surged through the air. Serafina gasped. Her pendant began glowing. Bright, brilliant, blinding. Ancient symbols appeared beneath her feet. Silver feathers swirled around her body. The crowd backed away in terror. "No," one of the older nobles whispered. The king's face turned pale, as though he suddenly remembered something he had long forgotten. "No." The light intensified. Serafina cried out. Her hands began changing. Feathers spread across her skin. Her body grew lighter, smaller. The entire ballroom erupted into chaos. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody, except the oldest members of the royal court. The forgotten curse. The ancient vow. A magical promise made centuries ago between the kingdoms. If the promised bride were publicly rejected, the union would break. And so would she. Silver feathers exploded into the air. One final flash of light filled the room. Then silence. Where Princess Serafina had stood moments before, A beautiful white swan now stood. The entire kingdom stared in horror. The swan's blue eyes filled with tears. Human tears. For a moment she looked directly at Lucien. The prince took a step forward, regret flooding his face. Serafina. But it was too late. Far too late. With one powerful beat of her wings, she rose into the air. Guests screamed. Windows shattered. Moonlight poured into the ballroom. And before anyone could stop her, the swan flew into the night. Away from the palace. Away from the kingdom. Away from the life she had spent 18 years dreaming about. And somewhere deep in her broken heart, Princess Serafina made a promise. She would never come back. Serafina flew until her wings could barely carry her. For 3 days and 3 nights she crossed forests, rivers and mountains. She avoided towns and villages, terrified that someone might recognize the royal pendant around her neck. The farther she flew from Ilaria, the lighter she should have felt. Instead, the pain followed her. Every beat of her wings carried the memory of the ballroom. The shocked faces. The whispers. The rejection. Most of all, Lucien's voice. "I do not love you." The words haunted her. By the 4th day, exhaustion finally overcame her. A storm rolled across the mountains. Rain soaked her feathers. Thunder shook the sky. The once proud princess fought desperately against the wind. But she was too tired. Too heartbroken. Too alone. A powerful gust threw her sideways. For a terrifying moment, she thought she would fall from the sky. Then she saw it. A kingdom. Far below. Silver towers rose beside a massive lake. Sunlight reflected from marble walls and crystal windows. The kingdom looked peaceful. Beautiful. Nothing like the kingdom she had left behind. Gathering the last of her strength, Serafina glided downward. The storm began fading as she approached. Soon her feet touched the surface of the lake. The cool water rippled around her. For the first time in days, she stopped moving. The kingdom stretched before her. Unknown. Foreign. Safe. Nobody here knew her name. Nobody here knew she was a princess. Nobody here knew she had once been promised to a future king. And for the first time since the curse began, that thought brought her comfort. As evening approached, she explored the shoreline. The kingdom's people smiled as they passed. Children waved. A little girl even tossed bread toward her. Serafina almost cried, not because of the bread. Because nobody looked at her with pity. Nobody whispered. To them she was simply a beautiful swan. Nothing more. Nothing less. As sunset painted the sky gold and pink, she wandered deeper into the royal grounds. That's when she found it. An ancient willow tree, standing beside the lake. Its silver-green branches draped gracefully over the water. The roots formed a natural shelter beneath the trunk. Protected. Quiet. Hidden. For the first time since leaving Ilaria, Serafina felt safe. She settled among the roots and tucked her head beneath her wing. The pendant rested against her feathers, the only piece of her old life she still carried. As darkness fell, moonlight filtered through the willow branches. The curse activated. Silver light surrounded her. Feathers became skin. Wings became arms. The swan became a woman once more. Serafina sat quietly beneath the tree, still wearing the same blush-pink gown, still wearing the same pendant, still trapped in the moment her life had fallen apart. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She stared across the moonlit lake, alone, heartbroken, certain she would spend the rest of her life this way. She didn't know that only a short distance away, a king was finishing his evening duties, and tomorrow night, their paths would finally cross. The kingdom of Asterwin slept peacefully beneath the stars. Lanterns glowed along the streets. The castle reflected silver moonlight across the lake. Inside the royal palace, King Adrian finally finished the last of his duties. The day had been long. Trade agreements, court hearings, military reports. A dozen problems that only a king could solve. Most rulers would have retired to their chambers. Adrian preferred to walk. The kingdom was safe, his people were happy, so each night, he took a quiet stroll around the royal grounds alone. No guards, no advisors. Just silence, and the cool evening air. Tonight was no different. Or so he thought. As Adrian followed the lakeside path, something caught his attention beneath the willow tree, a shape. White against the darkness, a swan. The beautiful creature rested among the tree roots, sleeping peacefully beneath the hanging branches. Adrian slowed his steps. That was unusual. Most swans stayed on the lake. Most stayed together. This one was alone. For a moment he considered approaching. Then moonlight caught something around the swan's neck. A flash of silver. The king looked closer. The swan wore a pendant. A beautiful silver pendant. The design was unfamiliar. A swan surrounded by lilies. Strange. He had never seen anything like it, certainly not on a bird. The swan stirred slightly in its sleep. Adrian expected fear. Instead, he saw something else. Sadness. Even sleeping, the creature seemed exhausted. Heartbroken. Lonely. The feeling struck him unexpectedly. The swan reminded him of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. For several moments he simply stood there, watching. Then he quietly stepped back. "If you chose this place," he murmured softly, "you must need the peace." The swan never woke. Adrian smiled faintly and continued his walk. But something felt different. The image stayed with him. The lonely swan. The silver pendant. The sadness in her eyes. Hours later, long after returning to the palace, he still found himself thinking about her. Meanwhile, beneath the willow tree, midnight arrived. Silver light appeared around the sleeping swan. Feathers became skin, wings became arms. The white swan vanished. Princess Seraphina sat beneath the tree once more. The blush-pink gown appeared around her. The silver family crest pendant rested against her throat exactly as it always had. The curse never changed. Neither did the memories. She stared across the lake, unaware that a king had stood only a few feet away earlier that night, unaware that someone had finally noticed her. For the first time since leaving Elaria, fate had begun moving once again. Neither of them knew it yet. But tomorrow night, the king would return. And this time he would stay a little longer. The following night, King Adrian found himself thinking about the swan long before sunset. He told himself it was simple curiosity, nothing more. Yet as the evening court session ended, he noticed his gaze drifting toward the windows overlooking the lake. Toward the willow tree. Toward the place where he had found the lonely creature. By the time the moon rose, he was already walking the lakeside path. The kingdom slept peacefully around him. Lanterns glowed softly. The lake shimmered beneath the moonlight. And beneath the ancient willow tree, the swan was still there. Relief surprised him. He had not expected to feel it. The beautiful white swan rested among the roots exactly where he had left her. The silver pendant still hung around her neck. The same pendant. The same mysterious crest. The same sadness. This time Adrian approached a little closer. Not enough to frighten her. Just enough to see her clearly. The swan opened her eyes. Blue eyes. Human eyes. For a brief moment, neither moved, neither looked away. Adrian wasn't sure why, but he felt as though she understood him. As though she was studying him just as carefully as he studied her. "Good evening," he said softly. The swan blinked. That was all. Yet somehow it felt like an answer. Adrian chuckled. "I suppose you're not very talkative." The swan tilted her head. For the first time in days, Seraphina felt something other than sadness. Confusion. Why was the king speaking to her? Most people admired swans from a distance. Yet this man seemed content, simply standing beside her. Expecting nothing. Demanding nothing. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable. Eventually Adrian sat on a nearby stone overlooking the lake. Far enough away that she wouldn't feel trapped. Close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Neither spoke. Neither left. The moon climbed higher into the sky. And for the first time since her curse began, Serafina found herself relaxing. Just a little. When Adrian finally stood to leave, he smiled toward her. "Sleep well, little swan." Little swan. The words made her chest ache. Not with sadness. With warmth. No one had spoken kindly to her since she left Ilaria. No one had looked at her without pity. Or judgment. Or curiosity. Yet this stranger had done all three. Without asking for anything in return. Adrian turned and began walking back toward the palace. Halfway down the path, he glanced over his shoulder. The swan was still watching him. He smiled. Then disappeared into the night. Beneath the willow tree, Serafina watched until he was gone. And for the first time since the night of her rejection, she smiled. Just a little. But it was enough. That night, when midnight arrived and the curse transformed her back into a woman, she sat beneath the willow tree, wearing her blush-pink gown and silver family crest pendant. For once, she wasn't thinking about Lucien. For once, she wasn't reliving the ballroom. For once, she was thinking about a king with kind eyes who had called her Little Swan. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something. The next evening Adrian returned. And the evening after that, then the one after that. Soon it became a routine neither of them spoke about. Each day Adrian ruled his kingdom. Each night he visited the willow tree. At first, Serafina didn't understand why. Surely a king had more important things to do. Yet every evening he appeared, sometimes carrying a small loaf of bread, sometimes fruit from the royal gardens, sometimes nothing at all. The gifts were never extravagant. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that he came. For the first time since leaving Ilaria, someone chose her. Not because they had to. Not because of politics. Not because of duty. Because they wanted to. The realization frightened her. And comforted her at the same time. One evening, Adrian settled onto his usual stone beside the lake. The moon reflected across the water like liquid silver. The swan rested beneath the willow tree, her silver pendant glimmering softly against her white feathers. "I spent 3 hours listening to nobles argue over taxes today," Adrian said. The swan blinked. 3 hours. Another blink. Adrian laughed. "Thank you. It's nice to know someone agrees with me." To his surprise, the swan huffed and turned her head away. Adrian stared, then burst into laughter. Was that attitude? The swan refused to look at him. For the first time in months, Serafina found herself fighting a smile. The sound of his laughter warmed something inside her, something she thought had died the night she left Ilaria. The days passed. The visits continued. Slowly, the distance between them shrank. Adrian never forced it, never rushed her. If she wanted space, he gave it. If she approached, he welcomed it. One evening he noticed she had moved closer. Only a few feet. But closer. The next night, she sat beside the stone, where he usually rested. The night after that, she followed him to the edge of the lake. Adrian pretended not to notice, but his smile lasted the entire walk home. Eventually he began talking about everything. Stories from court, funny arguments between servants, childhood memories, dreams for the kingdom. The swan listened to every word. Sometimes Serafina forgot she was cursed. Sometimes she forgot she was heartbroken. Sometimes she simply sat beside Adrian and watched the stars. And those moments became her favorite part of the day. One evening, Adrian arrived carrying a small basket. The swan greeted him near the shoreline. To his surprise, she was waiting. Waiting for him. The realization made his chest tighten. Not with sadness. With happiness. He knelt and offered a piece of fruit. The swan accepted it gently. Adrian smiled. "You know," he said softly, "I should probably stop calling you the swan." The swan tilted her head. "I think you deserve a proper name." For several moments Adrian pretended to think. Then his smile widened. "Little Swan." The swan froze. Little Swan. The name sounded ridiculous. And yet somehow, she loved it. Adrian laughed. "Yes, Little Swan suits you perfectly." The swan lowered her head, pretending not to care, but she secretly hoped he would say it again. As midnight approached, Adrian stood. "I should head back, Little Swan." The name came again. Warm, gentle, familiar. For reasons she couldn't explain, Serafina didn't want him to leave. Adrian started down the path, then stopped. A soft sound came from behind him. He turned. The swan had followed. Only a few steps. But she had followed. For a moment, neither moved. Then Adrian smiled. A genuine smile. One that reached his eyes. "Good night, Little Swan." The swan remained where she stood, watching him, waiting until he disappeared into the darkness. And only then did she return to the willow tree. For the first time since her rejection, Princess Serafina wasn't counting the days she had lost. She was looking forward to tomorrow, because tomorrow night, Adrian would come back. And she would be waiting. The nights passed like pages in a story neither of them realized they were writing. Every evening Adrian finished his duties and walked to the willow tree, and every evening Serafina waited. At first she had told herself she only stayed because the willow tree was safe. Now she knew that wasn't true. She stayed because of him. The moment she heard footsteps on the lakeside path, her heart lifted. The moment she saw his dark hair beneath the moonlight, she smiled. And every time he left, the willow tree felt a little emptier. One evening Adrian arrived later than usual. The swan was already waiting near the shoreline. When she spotted him, she immediately moved toward him. Adrian stopped. A smile spread across his face. "Little Swan?" The swan huffed softly. The king laughed. "You are worried." The swan turned her head away. Adrian smiled even wider. For some reason, knowing she had been waiting for him, made him happier than it should have. That night they sat together beside the lake. The moon reflected across the water. The castle lights shimmered in the distance. For a long while neither spoke. The silence was comfortable now. Familiar. Like being beside an old friend. Eventually Adrian sighed. "I attended 3 meetings today." The swan blinked. "They were all terrible." Another blink. "I knew you'd understand." The swan lowered her head as if hiding a smile. Adrian chuckled. Somewhere along the way, talking to her had become the best part of his day. He could tell her anything. His worries, his frustrations, his hopes, his dreams. And somehow she always listened. Never judged, never interrupted, never demanded anything. The realization struck him unexpectedly. He looked toward the swan. She was watching the lake. The silver family crest pendant glimmered against her white feathers. Moonlight danced across the water. For a moment, Adrian felt a strange ache in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Not loneliness, not sadness, something else. Something warmer. Something far more dangerous. He quickly looked away, but the feeling remained. The following evening he found himself thinking about her during court. The evening after that he caught himself smiling while reading reports. Soon his advisors began noticing. "Your Majesty seems unusually cheerful lately." Adrian offered no explanation. How could he? He couldn't exactly tell them he spent every evening talking to a swan. One night, while sitting beneath the willow tree, Adrian stared at the stars overhead. "Do you ever wish life had turned out differently?" he asked quietly. The swan looked toward him. Adrian smiled sadly. "I do." His gaze drifted toward the lake. "When I was younger, I thought I would fall in love." The swan's attention sharpened. "I thought one day I'd meet someone who felt like home." The words made Serafina's heart ache, because she understood exactly what he meant. For a moment, neither moved. Then the swan gently rested her head against his shoulder. Adrian froze. The world seemed to stop. Slowly, carefully, he reached up and stroked her feathers. The swan didn't pull away. Neither did he. For a long time they sat like that, the king and his little swan, beneath the moonlight, beside the lake, neither willing to break the moment. And somewhere deep inside, Adrian finally accepted the truth. He had fallen in love. Not with a princess. Not with a noble woman. Not even with someone he could understand. He had fallen in love with the lonely swan beneath the willow tree. And somehow, that felt perfectly right. As midnight approached, Adrian stood. For once, neither of them wanted the night to end. "Good night, little swan." The swan watched him walk away. And for the first time since her rejection, Seraphina felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The storm arrived without warning. Dark clouds swallowed the stars, lightning flashed across the sky, thunder rolled through the kingdom. Inside the palace, servants hurried to close windows and secure doors. Most people prepared to spend the night safely indoors. King Adrian couldn't stop thinking about the willow tree. Or the swan. For days, little swan had become part of his life. Part of his heart. The thought of her facing the storm alone filled him with unease. He tried to ignore it. For nearly an hour. Eventually he stood from his desk. His advisors would have called him insane. His servants would have begged him to stay. Instead, Adrian grabbed his cloak and left the palace. Rain poured from the sky. Wind whipped through the trees. The lakeside path was nearly impossible to see. Still, Adrian continued forward. The willow tree finally appeared through the storm. Relief flooded him. Little Swan was there, curled beneath the hanging branches, safe. Adrian stepped beneath the tree, sheltering from the rain. The swan lifted her head. The moment she saw him, she hurried closer. Adrian smiled. "You should be inside somewhere warm." The swan huffed softly. Despite the storm, she looked happy to see him. For a while they remained beneath the willow tree together, listening to the rain, watching lightning dance across the lake. Neither wanted to leave. But the storm only grew stronger. Midnight approached. Seraphina's heart sank. No. Not tonight. Not with Adrian here. Usually he had already left by now. Tonight the weather had delayed everything. She glanced toward the moon hidden behind the clouds. The curse would activate any moment. Panic filled her chest. She needed him to leave. Now. The swan began nudging him toward the path. Adrian frowned. "Little swan?" She nudged him again, harder. "What's gotten into you?" Another push. Then, another. The swan seemed desperate, almost frightened. Before Adrian could understand, lightning flashed across the sky. The silver pendant around her neck suddenly began glowing. Both froze. The pendant had never done that before. A second flash illuminated the willow tree. Silver light spread across the swan's feathers. Adrian stared. His heart stopped. The glow intensified. Feathers dissolved into shimmering light. Wings stretched and changed. The swan cried out. Not with the voice of a bird, with the voice of a woman. Adrian stumbled backward, unable to believe what he was seeing. The magic swirled around the willow tree like silver fire. The storm vanished from his thoughts. The world vanished. There was only the light. The transformation. The impossible truth unfolding before his eyes. Slowly, the glow faded. Where the swan had stood moments before, a woman knelt beneath the willow tree. Golden hair. Blue eyes. A breathtaking face. A blush-pink gown adorned with silver feathers. And around her neck, the same silver family crest pendant. The same pendant he had seen every night. The same pendant worn by his little swan. The woman lifted her head. Their eyes met. Shock filled both of them. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Rain fell around them. Thunder echoed across the lake. Yet neither noticed. Because in that moment, everything changed. Adrian finally understood. The sadness in her eyes. The loneliness. The secret. The curse. His little swan had never been a swan at all. And Seraphina realized the truth as well. The king she had grown to trust, the man she had begun to care about, now knew everything. For a long moment silence stretched between them. Then Adrian whispered the only words he could manage. "Little swan?" A tear slipped down Seraphina's cheek. Rain continued falling around them. Neither moved. Neither looked away. For what felt like an eternity, Adrian simply stared. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because the transformation was impossible, though it was. He stared because he recognized her. The eyes, the sadness, the silver pendant. His little swan. She had been standing before him all along. Serafina's heart pounded. This was the moment she had feared for months. The moment someone learned the truth. The moment everything changed. She expected questions. She expected suspicion. Perhaps even fear. Instead, Adrian spoke softly. "You're cold." Serafina blinked. Of all the things he could have said, that wasn't one of them. Adrian immediately removed his cloak and draped it around her shoulders. The warm fabric settled over the blush-pink gown. For a moment, she could only stare at him. "You should be angry," she whispered. Her voice was soft from disuse. Adrian froze. The sound of her voice sent a strange warmth through him. It was exactly how he imagined it would sound. Gentle, beautiful, sad. "Why would I be angry?" he asked. Tears filled Serafina's eyes. "Because I lied." Adrian shook his head. "You never lied." She looked away. "I hid the truth. You had a reason." The answer came so quickly that Serafina looked back at him. Adrian's expression never changed. There was no judgment, no disappointment, only concern. The same concern he had shown every night beneath the willow tree. The same kindness that had slowly healed her broken heart. For the first time, Serafina told someone everything. The rejection, the ceremony, the humiliation, the curse, the endless days spent trapped as a swan, the lonely flight across kingdoms, the willow tree, the tears she cried when nobody could see. Adrian listened quietly. As the story unfolded, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched. Not because he blamed her, because someone had hurt her. By the time she finished, the storm had begun to fade. Only a light rain remained. Neither noticed. Adrian looked toward the lake, trying to calm the anger building inside him. What was his name? Serafina already knew who he meant. Prince Lucien. The name tasted bitter. Adrian's eyes darkened. A prince? A fool. How could anyone look at the woman sitting before him and cast her aside? How could anyone be given her heart and throw it away? The thought made him furious. Eventually his gaze returned to her, and his anger disappeared. Because she looked frightened. Not of the storm. Of him. Of what he might think now. Adrian stepped closer. Then knelt beside her. "Look at me." Slowly, Serafina did. The king smiled. The same smile she had come to treasure. The same smile that greeted her every evening. The same smile she had missed whenever he left. "You're still my little swan." A tear slipped down her cheek. This time it wasn't from sadness. For months she had carried the weight of her curse alone. For months she had hidden. For months she had feared this exact moment. And yet, nothing had changed. Adrian still looked at her the same way. Still spoke to her the same way. Still cared. The realization shattered the final walls around her heart. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him. Adrian froze. Then slowly wrapped his arms around her in return. The rain stopped. The clouds parted. Moonlight spilled across the lake. And beneath the willow tree, the king and the swan princess held each other for the very first time. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring. Neither knew what challenges still waited ahead. But one thing was certain. Neither of them would face those challenges alone. Morning arrived far too quickly. For the first time in months, Serafina did not awaken beneath the willow tree. Instead, she found herself sitting beside Adrian as dawn painted the lake gold. Neither had slept. There had simply been too much to say. Too much to understand. Too much to feel. The curse returned with sunrise. Silver light surrounded Serafina. Moments later, the beautiful white swan stood beside Adrian once more. The transformation no longer frightened him. If anything, it made him admire her strength even more. "You've endured this every day?" he asked quietly. The swan lowered her head. Adrian's heart ached. No one should have carried such a burden alone. especially not her. As the kingdom woke, Adrian made a decision. One that would change everything. No more sleeping beneath this tree. The swan looked up. You belong somewhere safe. He smiled. You belong with me. The swan froze. For a moment, Serafina thought she had imagined the words. But Adrian's expression never changed. He meant every syllable. That evening, before sunset, Adrian returned to the willow tree with a royal carriage. No guards. No nobles. Just him. The swan waited beneath the branches. As she always had, Adrian offered his hand, even though she was currently a swan. A small smile touched his lips. Come home, little swan. The swan stepped toward him. Without hesitation, for the first time since leaving her kingdom, Serafina followed someone, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she trusted him. The palace staff nearly fainted when their king arrived with a swan, a very spoiled swan, a very beautiful swan, a swan that apparently had permission to wander wherever she pleased. For the next several days, rumors spread through the palace. No one understood why the king smiled so much. No one understood why he spent so much time near the royal gardens. And absolutely no one understood why a certain white swan seemed to follow him everywhere. One evening, after sunset, Adrian led Serafina to a private suite overlooking the lake. The room was beautiful. Large windows, fresh flowers, moonlight spilling across polished floors. A wardrobe stood against one wall. Serafina frowned. Adrian looked unusually nervous, something she had never seen before. What? She asked. Adrian smiled. I had something prepared. He opened the wardrobe. Inside hung a breathtaking gown. Soft baby blue. Silver crystal embroidery shimmered across the fabric, like moonlight dancing on water. Tiny feather patterns adorned the sleeves. The gown looked elegant, graceful, hopeful, nothing like the dress she wore the night her heart was broken. Serafina stared, speechless. I thought, Adrian began softly. Maybe it was time for a new beginning. Tears filled her eyes. Not because she was sad. Because nobody had ever done something so thoughtful for her before. When midnight arrived and she transformed back into her human form, the blush-pink gown disappeared. For the first time since her curse began, she changed into something new. The baby blue gown. The dress of her new life. When she stepped from the dressing room, Adrian forgot how to breathe. The soft blue made her look like moonlight itself. The silver pendant rested against the fabric. The same pendant. The same woman. But somehow different. Happier, hopeful, beautiful beyond words. Serafina nervously smoothed her skirt. Well? Adrian simply stared, then smiled. You look like a queen. Serafina blushed. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't seem frightening anymore. Because for the first time, she had a home. Word traveled quickly between kingdoms. Far quicker than either Adrian or Serafina realized. By the time autumn arrived, rumors had already begun spreading. Rumors of a mysterious princess living within King Adrian's palace. Rumors of a beautiful woman with golden hair. Rumors of a silver pendant bearing the crest of a forgotten royal house. And eventually, those rumors reached Prince Lucien. At first he ignored them. After all, Serafina was gone. Hadn't she disappeared months ago? Hadn't she vanished without a trace? Yet something about the stories bothered him. The golden hair. The silver crest. The pendant. The more he heard, the more uneasy he became. Finally, unable to ignore the growing suspicion, Lucien traveled to Astawin himself. And the moment he arrived, everything changed. That afternoon, Serafina stood in the palace gardens. She wore her beautiful baby blue gown. Silver embroidery shimmered beneath the sunlight. The silver family crest pendant rested against her chest. Nearby, Adrian sat beside her beneath a flowering tree. Neither noticed the visitor approaching. Until a familiar voice froze Serafina in place. Serafina. The world stopped. Slowly she turned. Her heart nearly stopped. Prince Lucien stood at the end of the garden path. The same prince. The same man. The same face she had once loved. For a moment, old memories rushed back. The ceremony. The rejection. The heartbreak. The curse. Then Adrian stepped beside her. And the memories lost their power. Because she wasn't the same woman anymore. Lucien stared at her. Shock filled his face. Then regret. Then disbelief. You survived. The word struck Adrian like a slap. Survived. As if she was something discarded. Something forgotten. Serafina's expression remained calm. I did. Lucien took a step forward. I've been looking for you. No. Her answer was immediate. You haven't. The prince froze. For the first time in his life, nobody rushed to agree with him. Nobody excused him. Nobody made his choices easier. The silence stretched. Eventually Lucien looked away. I made a mistake. Serafina said nothing. I was young. Nothing. I didn't understand. Still nothing. The prince's shoulders sagged. For months he had imagined this moment. Imagined apologizing. Imagined earning forgiveness. Imagined winning her back. But standing before her now, he finally understood something. The woman looking at him wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. Because someone else had already chosen her. Every single day. Without hesitation. Without conditions. Without fear. Lucien's gaze shifted toward Adrian. The king stood beside Serafina. Protective. Steady. Certain. And suddenly the prince understood everything. The way she looked at Adrian. The way Adrian looked at her. The way neither stepped away from the other. The truth was obvious. He had lost her. Long before he ever arrived. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Lucien bowed his head. Not to Adrian. To Serafina. I am sorry. This time she believed him. Not because she loved him. Not because she wanted him back, but because she no longer carried hatred in her heart. Only peace. Serafina smiled gently. I forgive you. The words surprised even her. For so long she thought forgiveness would be impossible. Yet now it felt easy. Because Adrian had helped heal the wound Lucien created, and because she finally understood her worth. Lucien nodded. A sad smile touched his face. Then he turned and walked away. This time, she didn't watch him leave. Instead, she looked toward Adrian. And Adrian smiled. The future was standing beside her. Not walking away. The gardens felt different after Lucien left. Lighter. As though a chapter of Serafina's life had finally come to an end. For the first time since her rejection, she felt truly free. No anger, no regret, no lingering questions. Only peace. That evening, Serafina stood on a palace balcony overlooking the lake. The same lake that had once been her refuge. The same lake beside the willow tree, where everything had changed. Moonlight danced across the water. Behind her, the palace celebrated. Music drifted through open windows. Laughter echoed through the halls. But Serafina remained outside, lost in thought. A familiar voice broke the silence. Thinking too much again? She smiled before turning. Adrian. Of course. He stepped beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. They simply watched the lake, the place where their story began. Eventually Adrian looked toward her. Do you miss it? Serafina tilted her head. The willow tree. She smiled softly. A little. Adrian laughed. I should have known. Silence returned. Comfortable. Warm. Safe. Then Adrian grew serious. There is something I need to ask you. Serafina turned toward him. For the first time since meeting him, Adrian looked nervous. Truly nervous. Her heart began racing. Slowly, Adrian reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Serafina froze. The world disappeared. The music. The castle. The night. Everything vanished. There was only him. And the box in his hands. Adrian took a breath. Then another. Before finally speaking. When I first found you beneath that willow tree, a smile touched his lips. I thought I was helping a lonely swan. Serafina laughed through tears. Adrian smiled. But somewhere along the way, his voice softened. You became my best friend. Her eyes filled. You became the first person I wanted to see every day. He stepped closer. The first person I thought about every morning. Another step. The first person I wanted beside me every night. Tears slipped down Serafina's cheeks. Adrian opened the velvet box. Inside rested a breathtaking silver ring. At its center was a sapphire, surrounded by tiny diamonds, shaped like swan feathers. Moonlight reflected across the stone. Just like the lake where they met. Adrian dropped to one knee. Serafina covered her mouth. The world stopped. Serafina. His voice shook, not from fear, from love. I don't care about curses. He smiled. I don't care about kingdoms. Another smile. And I certainly don't care if you're a swan. Serafina laughed through her tears. Adrian's eyes never left hers. All I care about is you. The night seemed to hold its breath. Will you marry me? Tears streamed freely down Serafina's face. She thought about the girl standing in the rejection ceremony months ago. The girl who believed she wasn't enough. The girl who flew away with a broken heart. That girl felt so far away now. Because standing before her was a man who chose her. Every day. Without hesitation, without conditions, without fear. And she knew her answer before he finished asking. Yes. Adrian blinked. Serafina laughed. Yes. The king stood so quickly he nearly dropped the ring. Both of them laughed. Then he slid the ring onto her finger. The perfect fit. The sapphire sparkled beside her silver family crest pendant. For a moment they simply stared at one another. Then Adrian pulled her into his arms. And beneath the moonlit sky, the future finally began. The palace had never been busier. Every hallway buzzed with excitement. Servants hurried from room to room carrying fabrics, flowers, ribbons, and decorations. Musicians practiced in the courtyards. Gardeners worked from sunrise until sunset. The entire kingdom seemed determined to make the royal wedding unforgettable. And at the center of it all was Serafina. For the first time in months, she woke smiling. The engagement ring sparkled on her finger. A constant reminder that everything had changed. The lonely swan beneath the willow tree was gone. Now she was a future queen. One morning a team of royal seamstresses arrived at her suite. They carried measuring ribbons, sketchbooks, and rolls of white silk. Serafina immediately knew what was happening. The wedding dress. Her wedding dress. Excitement fluttered inside her chest. The seamstresses spent hours taking measurements. Every detail had to be perfect. Every stitch worthy of a queen. Throughout the fitting, Serafina couldn't stop smiling. The entire experience felt like a dream she feared she might wake from. Later that afternoon, Adrian secretly visited the lakeside ceremony site. The willow tree stood nearby, exactly where they first met. Exactly where everything began. He watched workers decorate the shoreline with white flowers and silver lanterns. The sight filled him with emotion. Soon she would be his wife. Soon they would begin the next chapter together. That evening Serafina wandered through the palace gardens. Adrian joined her beneath the moonlight. Neither spoke much. They simply walked together, hand in hand, talking about small things. Future plans. Future children. Future adventures. For the first time, both allowed themselves to imagine a lifetime together. Before bed, Serafina sat beside her window overlooking the lake. The moon reflected across the water. The willow tree glowed softly in the distance. She looked down at the sapphire engagement ring, then touched the silver family crest pendant around her neck. 2 symbols, one representing her past, the other her future, and for the first time, both filled her heart with happiness. The wedding was only days away. The morning of the wedding arrived beneath clear blue skies. For the first time in many months, Serafina woke before sunrise. Not because of fear, not because of sadness, but because of excitement. Today was the day she would marry Adrian. Sunlight poured through the palace windows as attendants helped her prepare. Carefully, they fastened the final pieces of her breathtaking wedding gown. The white swan queen dress seemed almost magical. Silver embroidery shimmered like moonlight across fresh snow. Crystal details sparkled with every movement. The flowing train stretched across the room like a river of white silk. When Serafina finally looked into the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, because she looked happy. Truly happy. Meanwhile, beside the lake, Adrian waited beneath the willow tree. Guests from across the kingdom had gathered. White roses lined the aisle, silver lanterns hung from the willow branches, the lake sparkled behind the ceremony site. Everything was perfect. Yet Adrian barely noticed any of it, because all he could think about was Serafina. For the first time in his life, the king was nervous. Then the music began, the crowd rose, and Adrian turned. His breath caught. Serafina stood at the beginning of the aisle. For a moment, the entire world disappeared. The guests, the flowers, the castle, everything. There was only her. She walked slowly toward him. The white swan queen. The woman who had once slept beneath this very tree. The woman who had changed his life forever. Tears filled Adrian's eyes, and for once he didn't care who saw them. When she finally reached him, neither spoke. They simply stared at each other, smiling, laughing softly through tears. The officiant began the ceremony. Words were spoken. Promises were made. Vows exchanged. But everyone present knew something important. These vows had not begun today. They had begun months ago. Beside a lonely lake. Between a king and a swan. When the vows were complete, the officiant smiled. King Adrian, Princess Serafina, it is my honor to pronounce you husband and wife. Cheers erupted. The kingdom celebrated. But neither Adrian nor Serafina heard it. Because Adrian gently lifted her chin and kissed her. Beneath the willow tree, exactly where their story began. The crowd erupted into applause. White flower petals filled the air. The lake sparkled. The willow branches danced in the wind. And somewhere deep within her heart, the last piece of the curse finally disappeared. Not because of magic. Because of love. The king and his little swan were finally together. Forever. The celebration lasted long into the evening. Music echoed through the palace halls. Laughter filled the gardens. The kingdom rejoiced. Their king had found his queen. Yet as the sun began to set, Adrian quietly took Serafina's hand. Without guards, without servants, without crowds, just the two of them. Together, they followed the familiar path, leading toward the lake. The same path Adrian had walked countless times. The same path where he first met a lonely white swan. Soon the willow tree came into view. Its silver-green branches danced softly in the evening breeze. The lake reflected the colors of the sunset. Gold, pink, silver. Everything felt peaceful. For several moments neither spoke. They simply stood beneath the tree, remembering. Serafina reached out and gently touched the old bark. A smile appeared on her lips. How strange life could be. Months ago she had stood beneath this tree completely alone. Heartbroken. Rejected. Certain her story was over. Now she stood there as a queen. Loved. Chosen. Home. Tears filled her eyes. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Adrian stepped beside her. What are you thinking about? Serafina laughed softly. Everything, Adrian smiled. The two sat together beneath the willow tree, just as they had so many times before. Only now everything was different. The curse was gone. The loneliness was gone. The fear was gone. Only love remained. As twilight settled across the kingdom, swans drifted peacefully across the lake. The castle lights began to glow in the distance. A perfect ending. Or perhaps, a perfect beginning. Adrian wrapped an arm around Serafina. She rested her head against his shoulder. Together they watched the final rays of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. King and queen. Husband and wife. The king and his little swan. Forever. And beneath the willow tree where their story began, their happily ever after finally arrived. The king found his queen, the swan found her home, and beneath the willow tree where their story began, they discovered that true love was never about being chosen. It was about finding the one who would choose you every single day.